英語聞き流し10分間、名作リスニング、英語テキストと MP3 ダウンロード、その他の物語は、ホームページよりご利用いただけます。88thpp.com 88thpp.com
When he suddenly found himself attacked by cold in the head, he would have had to fly from the palace, but for the timely aid of our dear Tylo, who ran after the little minx and drove her back to her cavern, amidst the laughter of Tydal and Mydal, who thought gleefully that, so far, the trial had not been very terrible. The boy, therefore, ran to the next door with still greater courage. "Take care," cried Night, in a dreadful voice. "It's the wars. They are more powerful than ever. I daren't think what would happen, if one of them broke loose. Stand ready, all of you, to push back the door." Night had not finished uttering her warnings, when the plucky little fellow repented his rashness. He tried in vain to shut the door which he had opened, an invincible force was pushing it from the other side, streams of blood flowed through the cracks, flames shot forth, shouts, oaths and groans mingled with the roar of cannon and the rattle of musketry. Everybody in the palace of Night was running about in wild confusion. Bread and Sugar tried to take to flight, but could not find the way out, and they now came back to Tybal and put their shoulders to the door with despairing force. The cat pretended to be anxious, while secretly rejoicing. "This may be the end of it," she said, curling her whiskers. "They won't dare to go on after this." Dear Tylo made superhuman efforts to help his little master, while Mydal stood crying in a corner. At last, our hero gave a shout of triumph. "Hurrah! They're giving way. Victory! Victory! The door is shut." At the same time, he dropped on the steps, utterly exhausted, dabbing his forehead with his poor little hands which shook with terror. "Well?" asked Night, harshly. "Have you had enough? Did you see them?" "Yes, yes," replied the little fellow, sobbing. "They are hideous and awful. I don't think they have the blue bird." "You may be sure they haven't," answered Night, angrily. "If they had, they would eat him at once. You see there is nothing to be done." Tydal drew himself up proudly. "I must see everything," he declared. "Light said so." "It's an easy thing to say," retorted Night, "when one's afraid and stays at home." "Let us go to the next door," said Tydal, resolutely. "What's in here?" "This is where I keep the shades and the terrors." Tydal reflected for a minute. "As far as shades go," he thought, "Mrs. Night is poking fun at me. It's more than an hour since I've seen anything but shade in this house of hers, and I shall be very glad to see daylight again. As for the terrors, if they are anything like the ghosts, we shall have another good joke." Our friend went to the door and opened it, before his companions had time to protest. For that matter, they were all sitting on the floor, exhausted with the last fright, and they looked at one another in astonishment, glad to find themselves alive after such a scare. Meanwhile, Tydal threw back the door and nothing came out. "There's no one there," he said. "Yes, there is. Yes, there is. Look out," said Night, who was still shamming fright. She was simply furious. She had hoped to make a great impression with her terrors, and, lo and behold, the wretches, who had so long been snubbed by man, were afraid of him. She encouraged them with kind words and succeeded in coaxing out a few tall figures covered with grey veils. They began to run all around the hall until, hearing the children laugh, they were seized with fear and rushed indoors again. The attempt had failed, as far as Night was concerned, and the dread hour was about to strike. Already, Tydal was moving towards the big door at the end of the hall. A few last words took place between them. "Do not open that one," said Night, in awestruck tones. "Why not?" "Because it's not allowed. Then it's here that the blue bird is hidden. Go no farther, do not tempt fate, do not open that door." "But why?" again asked Tydal, obstinately. Thereupon, Night, irritated by his persistency, flew into a rage, hurled the most terrible threats at him, and ended by saying, "Not one of those who have opened it, were it but by a hair's breadth, has ever returned alive to the light of day. It means certain death, and all the horrors, all the terrors, all the fears of which men speak on earth are as nothing compared with those which await you if you insist on touching that door." "Don't do it, master dear," said Bread, with chattering teeth. "Don't do it. Take pity on us. I implore you on my knees. You are sacrificing the lives of all of us, mewed the cat. I won't. I shan't, sobbed Myrtle. Pity. Pity. Whined Sugar, wringing his fingers. All of them were weeping and crying, all of them crowded round Tylo. Dear Tylo alone, who respected his little master's wishes, dared not speak a word, though he fully believed that his last hour had come. 2 big tears rolled down his cheeks, and he licked Tylo's hands in despair. It was really a most touching scene, and for a moment, our hero hesitated. His heart beat wildly, his throat was parched with anguish, he tried to speak and could not get out a sound. Besides, he did not wish to show weakness in the presence of his hapless companions. If I have not the strength to fulfill my task, he said to himself, who will fulfill it? If my friends behold my distress, it is all up with me, they will not let me go through with my mission and I shall never find the blue bird. At this thought, the boy's heart leapt within his breast and all his generous nature rose in rebellion. It would never do to be, perhaps, within arm's length of happiness and not to try for it, at the risk of dying in the attempt, to try for it and hand it over at last to all mankind. That settled it. Tylo resolved to sacrifice himself. Like a true hero, he brandished the heavy golden key and cried, I must open the door. He ran up to the great door, with Tylo panting by his side. The poor dog was half dead with fright, but his pride and his devotion to Tylo obliged him to smother his fears. I shall stay, he said to his master, I'm not afraid. I shall stay with my little god. In the meantime, all the others had fled. Bread was crumbling to bits behind a pillar, Sugar was melting in a corner with Myrtle in his arms, Night and the cat, both shaking with fury, kept to the far end of the hall. A wonderful garden lay before him. A dream garden filled with flowers that shone like stars. Then Tylo gave Tylo a last kiss, pressed him to his heart and, with never a tremble, put the key in the lock. Yells of terror came from all the corners of the hall, where the runaways had taken shelter, while the 2 leaves of the great door opened by magic in front of our little friend, who was struck dumb with admiration and delight. What an exquisite surprise! A wonderful garden lay before him, a dream garden filled with flowers that shone like stars, waterfalls that came rushing from the sky and trees which the moon had clothed in silver. And then there was something whirling like a blue cloud among the clusters of roses. Tylo rubbed his eyes, he could not believe his senses. He waited, looked again and then dashed into the garden, shouting like mad. Come quickly. Come quickly. They are here. We have them at last. Millions of blue birds. Thousands of millions. Come, Myrtle. Come, Tylo. Come, all. Help me. You can catch them by handfuls. Reassured at last, his friends came running up and all darted in among the birds, seeing who could catch the most. I've caught 7 already, cried Myrtle. I can't hold them. Nor can I, said Tylo. I have too many of them. They're escaping from my arms. Tylo has some too. Let us go out, let us go. Light is waiting for us. How pleased she will be. This way, this way. And they all danced and scampered away in their glee, singing songs of triumph as they went. Night and the cat, who had not shared in the general rejoicing, crept back anxiously to the great door, and Night whimpered. Haven't they got him? No, said the cat, who saw the real blue bird perched high up on a moonbeam. They could not reach him, he kept too high. Our friends in all haste ran up the numberless stairs between them and the daylight. Each of them hugged the birds which he had captured, never dreaming that every step which brought them nearer to the light was fatal to the poor things, so that, by the time they came to the top of the staircase, they were carrying nothing but dead birds. Light was waiting for them anxiously. Well, have you caught him? She asked. Yes, yes, said Tylo. Lots of them. There are thousands. Look. As he spoke, he held out the dear birds to her and saw, to his dismay, that they were nothing more than lifeless corpses, their poor little wings were broken and their heads drooped sadly from their necks. The boy, in his despair, turned to his companions. Alas, they too were hugging nothing but dead birds. Then Tylo threw himself sobbing into Light's arms. Once more, all his hopes were dashed to the ground. Do not cry, my child, said Light. You did not catch the one that is able to live in broad daylight. We shall find him yet. Of course, we shall find him, said Bread and Sugar, with one voice. They were great boobies, both of them, but they wanted to console the boy. As for friend Tylo, he was so much put out that he forgot his dignity for a moment and, looking at the dead birds, exclaimed, "Are they good to eat, I wonder?" The party set out to walk back and sleep in the Temple of Light. It was a melancholy journey, all regretted the peace of home and felt inclined to blame Tylo for his want of caution. Sugar edged up to Bread and whispered in his ear, "Don't you think, Mr. Chairman, that all this excitement is very useless?" And Bread, who felt flattered at receiving so much attention, answered, pompously, "Never you fear, my dear fellow, I shall put all this right. Life would be unbearable if we had to listen to all the whimsies of that little madcap. Tomorrow, we shall stay in bed." They forgot that, but for the boy at whom they were sneering, they would never have been alive at all, and that, if he had suddenly told Bread that he must go back to his pan to be eaten and Sugar that he was to be cut into small lumps to sweeten Daddy's coffee and Mummy's syrups, they would have thrown themselves at their benefactor's feet and begged for mercy. In fact, they were incapable of appreciating their good luck until they were brought face to face with bad. Poor things. The fairy Baraloon, when making them a present of their human life, ought to have thrown in a little wisdom. They were not so much to blame. Of course, they were only following man's example. Given the power of speaking, they jabbered; knowing how to judge, they condemned; able to feel, they complained. They had hearts which increased their sense of fear, without adding to their happiness. As to their brains, which could easily have arranged all the rest, they made so little of them that they had already grown quite rusty, and, if you could have opened their heads and looked at the works of their life inside, you would have seen the poor brains, which were their most precious possession, jumping about at every movement they made and rattling in their empty skulls like dry peas in a pod. Fortunately, Light, thanks to her wonderful insight, knew all about their state of mind. She determined, therefore, to employ the elements and things no more than she was obliged to. They are useful, she thought, to feed the children and amuse them on the way, but they must have no further share in the trials, because they have neither courage nor conviction. Meanwhile, the party walked on, the road widened out and became resplendent, and, at the end, the Temple of Light stood on a crystal height, shedding its beams around. The tired children made the dog carry them pick-a-back by turns, and they were almost asleep when they reached the shining steps.
英語聞き流し10分間、名作リスニング、英語テキストと MP3 ダウンロード、その他の物語は、ホームページよりご利用いただけます。88thpp.com 88thpp.com